Hello, and thanks for joining us today as we initiate our study in the book of the Song of Solomon. Back in 1969, as a teenager, I attended the Florida College Lectures, and in that lectureship program that year, Brother Homer Haley did a presentation on the Song of Solomon that has always stuck with me. I really liked the simplistic way that he explained the content of the book, and that's the approach that I would like to use as we begin our study in the book of the Song of Solomon. Haley said, "This is probably the most neglected portion of God's divine book. And yet every student of the Bible must believe that it contains some message profitable for man. The poem has been praised by some, maligned by others, but when properly understood, it contains a charm and beauty as well as a profound lesson worthy of the effort to appreciate it." And I simply agree with Haley's estimation here. He acknowledged that some will differ from the view that we're going to take in this study, but it was the view that he found most sensible, and I have to agree with that. I think that as we're going to see this thing unfolding, it is a long, beautiful poem that depicts a love triangle between a young Shulamite maiden and her true lover, which is a shepherd boy from the country, when she finds herself caught up in the affections of King Solomon. And she's got to straighten out this love triangle and decide who she is going to abide with in the long term. In looking at it in overview, in verse 1, Solomon says it's the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. And so sometimes in some Bibles and in some reference works, it's simply referred to as the Song of Songs, as a secondary title for this work created by King Solomon. There are some unique characteristics about this book. The Song of Songs is the only book in the Bible which consists wholly of poetry and conversation. The Psalms, though written in poetic form, also contain sections of prose or conversation or just dramatic interlude. Now, some have said that there are no references to God at all in the book of the Song of Solomon. But in the English Standard Version, there is one allusion to deity that is found in chapter 8 in verse 6, where it says the very flame of the Lord in the English Standard Version. But this is not a profoundly religious work with references to God and religion. It's never quoted by Christ or the apostles, and we find no expression of natural religion or pious devotion, no vision, miracle, or indication of immediate inspiration appears in it anywhere. It is simply a beautiful poem that tells a powerful story. It's been pointed out that in the book there is a contrast between urban life and rural life, and the country living seemed to be the one of most advantage. We find that Griffiths, in his commentary on it, said, "In the country, the maid of Shunem has all of her joys. In the city is where she experiences her woes and sorrows, accidents, and peculiar troubles. To her, being in the country with her shepherd boy lover is the best of all possible worlds." Now, there's been a lot of effort put forth to try and dissect this work and explain how it is all put together. I find that a little heavy for my taste. Some have called it just an unfolding drama, but it's got so many poetic features to it that maybe that's a little bit of an oversimplification. Some go the other way and say it's just a light-spirited, pleasant song, probably written for some wedding occasion or something. And I can't quite go that way either. I think God's Word carries more lessons to it than that. Some have called it just a lyrical, pastoral poem, or maybe it's just a dramatic pastoral. That is just a dramatic story that is pleasant to review, something that is going to make you feel good and that sort of thing. But to me, getting into all that structure appears to be a little heavy. It's just simply to me a poem from start to finish. But if you break it up into sections, kind of like a play, where you identify the speakers and the unfolding of the action, it takes on a whole new meaning. Now, some folks have spent a lot of time trying to dig into this book and look between the lines and see what they can find there. To some authors, they call it an anthology of love songs. They just break it up into little bits and pieces, and here's a song, or here's a bit of a poem, and the whole book is just a celebration of love. But it doesn't have any kind of unifying theme to them. It's just a collection or an anthology of love songs. Now, a couple of writers went deeper into it, and they look at it as a great big allegory. Now, an allegory is a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. And many of the Jewish writers, now this theory did not actually evolve until about the 8th century, the Jews wrote about it saying, oh, this is a love song talking about how God loves his people, the church. And so this is all a figurative description of the mutual love between Jehovah and his chosen people. And that was the slant that they used in interpreting it. Origen, who was an early church writer of the 3rd century, kind of an eccentric fella, kind of weird in a lot of ways, he saw it also as an allegory. And to him, it was he took a view that became widely accepted in the early church, that really what Solomon was writing about was the mutual love between Christ and the church. And that's the essential point of view that Origen takes to this. Because of the time frame of its writing, going all the way back to the days of Solomon, I find it hard to see that as the principal or hidden message that Solomon was getting at. But it is possible, I suppose, because there is a true love there, and Christ has a true love for his church. We're taught in the book of Ephesians. But I don't believe that that's the primary lesson that is to be gleaned from our study of the Song of Solomon. The typical view is that it's just some kind of dramatic, lyrical poem, and it may be talking about the love Christ had for the church. It may talk about God's love for Jehovah. It may talk about the love between a man and his wife. It may talk about, true love as opposed to infatuation. Those are some of the views that are often put into this. But I think that in struggling through all of that material, it takes away from the simplicity and the beauty that is found in the work. Basically, what we're going to be exploring here is the idea of a Shulamite maiden who is in love with a shepherd boy in the country. But some way or another, she catches the eye of King Solomon. And King Solomon sweeps her up, winds up bringing her back to the palace in Jerusalem. He tries his best to woo her and to get her to fall in love with him, like so many other women had. And he praises her beauty and flatters her in all kinds of ways. He makes all kinds of grand and great promises to her, but he never is able to win her heart. And so this is the contest. Is the true abiding love that this maiden has for her shepherd boy going to survive this flattery and this infatuation and all of the glamour that could be offered to her from another source, that being King Solomon himself? We look at some of the things that some of the commentators wrote about it. Reveille said, "It is the contest between the fidelity which is inspired by true love and the allurements of flattered vanity that the interest of the drama consists." That's the major core of the lesson. True love versus the flattered sort of affection. We hold that the canticle is an implicit condemnation of the polygamous old king and a paean, or a song of triumph, in praise of virtue and the love of one man to one woman, is what Griffith says in his commentary. So a lot of folks have been able to see this triangle that we're going to be talking about, and I hope that we're going to be able to see how this thing unfolds and what a tight spot this girl is in. as she tries to figure out who she's going to turn to as the lifelong love of her life. Her early relationship with the shepherd boy, or all of the glamour of the king. Well, there's a few questions here at the end of Lesson 1 that we can consider a little bit before we actually start looking to the text itself. Who is the author of this poetic piece? Well, Solomon declares in verse 1 that it's him, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. And there are a couple of titles in question 2 that are often ascribed to this book. It is sometimes called the Song of Solomon, and at other times it is called the Song of Songs. But it certainly is a commanding piece of literature whenever you begin to look at it in detail. You know, it is a book that is composed exclusively of poetry and conversation that's woven together to produce a dramatic play that teaches many important lessons. We'll see a lot of stuff in here as Solomon starts talking about the woman and her beauty and the love that he has for her, and as she reminisces about the love that she has for her shepherd boy. In question 4, it asks, is God ever mentioned directly in the text? Well, no, he's not. There is an allusion to the flame of the Lord, but God is not the centerpiece of this. This is something that's talking about human relationships and the dynamics of those human relationships without much mention or reference made back to God. You have to remember, in King Solomon's life, we kind of see a pendulum swinging back and forth. He starts out in his early days being devoted to God and trying so hard to follow in his King David's footsteps, his father. And then you see him having his faith wane as he becomes involved with a lot of different women. And then, as we mentioned in our last study in Ecclesiastes, it may have been later in his life that he began to turn back toward God, understanding that our real duty is to fear God and keep his commandments. I would suppose that the Song of Solomon might have been written maybe in some of Solomon's, shall we say, wilder days, in which, as he said in Ecclesiastes, he gave his life to mirth and to fun and to love and to passion. He went down that road to see if that was ultimate fulfillment in life. And I think the Song of Solomon may have sprung from some of that adventure. But there is a profound religious lesson that we learn here about the beauty of love as God has put it here for man to enjoy. In question 5, it says, what two lifestyles are contrasted in this book? Well, there's going to be a lot of material talking about the beauties of country life, the beauty of the country. There will be many country images of beautiful things that are comparisons to the beauty of the Shulamite woman. So there's going to be a lot of rural references throughout the book. And at the ending of the book, whenever the Shulamite woman is able to come back to the country, is when she is her happiest. But there's also references of her time when she was in Jerusalem, when she was at the palace, and some of the hardships that she experienced whenever she was there. And so you're going to see some of the pressures of city life, which are uncomfortable for this maiden from the country. In question 6, it says, many have analyzed the book, but a sensible view of it is to interpret the book literally as a story of a love triangle. Let's just take it for what it says and draw the lessons from that we can find, not trying to look for deeper meanings, and maybe this is a reference to this, and maybe this is a lesson that teaches that. All of that may be well and good, all of that may be true. But I think the power of the piece is just in looking at a literal reading and interpretation of what Solomon has given to us. And so in question 7, who are the three main characters in this love triangle? Of course, it all centers around a Shulamite maiden. We're never given a name for her, but this maiden is a beautiful woman from the country. We're going to be seeing descriptions of her in many different forms. And she has an abiding love for a shepherd boy. And she dreams of him constantly. She thinks of him, how wonderful he is, and how great that relationship is. But then there is a third character that enters into this setting. At some point in time, King Solomon sees this Shulamite woman. It appears that while he was at the tents in Issachar, he sees her while she is doing her work in the country and is absolutely captivated by her beauty. And so he then brings her to the palace in Jerusalem and begins to make overtures to her to win her love. And so that's going to be the setup of what we're going to be studying as we start working our way through the book of the Song of Solomon. It's going to be broken up, as I'll break it up as to speakers, as to who is speaking when, and we'll try to lace all of this together into a study that I think is going to be very, very beneficial. If you're doing study as separate and apart from my notes on the Song of Solomon, like I said, you're going to find a lot of different literature written by several different men, taking dramatically different views. I know that Dan King, in the workbook that we were using on Ecclesiastes, he looks very deeply into the book of the Song of Solomon. But I felt that a lighter view and looking at the generalized lesson and simply following Haley's idea of a literal interpretation of what is actually here probably would be much more pleasant for our study and hopefully very, very beneficial. And I appreciate you being with us today as we get started with our first lesson here in the Song of Solomon. And next Wednesday, we'll begin to look at the text and analyze in detail what actually is penned here by the great king who had so much wisdom, King Solomon. Thank you for joining us today.